Hey, good day, everyone. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. This title slide's a bit off. It doesn't have my colleague's name here, but if you've been on our events before, you were used to hearing from Brian Spendolini, my partner in crime. And today we're going to spend about 30 minutes going over some different techniques our tools give you for loading data into your Oracle database. This is being recorded, so yes, you can watch it later. And yes, I will share the slides with Anusha. That'll go up on the page. Hey, Jose, thanks for saying hi in the chat. If you have questions and you want to ask those, use the Q&A mechanism. That way, Brian and I can more easily triage those as they come in and out. And the recording for this session should be up in the next day or so. All right, so let's get into it. Loading data is a pretty popular topic when it comes to people looking for help on our tools to make that easier. And there's two different tactics that we'll discuss today. One is working with data pump in those DMP or dump files. And we have tooling that makes that easier, and we'll go over that. And then you've also got data laying in some sort of flat file somewhere, or many flat files, the most popular formats being CSV and JSON, or if you're on an older interface, they might be giving you XML. And I wanted to tackle that bit first. I'm a big fan of SQL and I'm a big fan of the database. So I want to help you get this data in the database, and there's some benefits there. Hopefully I don't have to oversell this too much, but once it's in the database, you can protect it in a couple different ways. One, you can add business rules and constraints, and you can normalize the data. If you're just pulling CSV off the internet, you can have duplicates, maybe things aren't normalized. The database makes that much more easier to accomplish if you want to take that step. Probably the number one reason to get it into the database is so you can use the number one access layer for working with data, and that's being the structured query language, or SQL or SQL. Almost everyone out there is going to eventually come to the point of saying, hey, can I use SQL to work with the data here in the system? Even in your NoSQL interfaces like Mongo, people are asking for SQL tools and SQL prompts to go against the data. And I think if you go and look at top skills that employers are looking for right now in the IT space, I think SQL is almost always in the top 3. And also, it's just nice that Oracle generally makes access to your data faster. We have on our database tools team multiple interfaces and tools to help you get the data into your database. I hate saying the word classic because it makes me feel old, but classically, we have SQL Developer Desktop. That's been around since 2005 or so, and you can simply point to delimited text files, to CSV files, and put them in a new table or put them into an existing table. And it's very wizard driven. You literally interview you, ask you some questions about the data, and you're basically helping us map it into those tables. And yes, it also supports Excel. Then we have our latest and greatest toy, SQL Developer Web, or sometimes you might see it referred to as database actions. That's in your browser. You can simply drag and drop Excel or CSV or XML or JSON files into your browser, and we'll read that file and basically give you a similar wizard interface to put that into a new or an existing table. The beauty there is you don't have any software to install unless you haven't installed a web browser yet. So there are some tips I wanted to share to have a better experience using these wizards, regardless if you're in the the desktop or in the web interface. And I'll do some live, I don't know if I call it live demo, but I'll toggle over to the actual tools here in a second so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But when we're building new tables, first of all, I'm not sure an Excel spreadsheet should be used to define the new table. I would like to think in my imaginary land where I live, where I sleep well at night and don't have nightmares about this stuff, is you've done data modeling and you've had a data architect tell us exactly what, you know, the employee's table or entity should look like and how we're going to split things up into departments and locations and regions and all of that good stuff. But let's pretend we live in the real world where you have a quick and dirty task and you just want to get this Excel file on a table and do the SQL over it. When our tools suck in this file and offer to build you a table on the fly, we make a lot of assumptions, and those assumptions can cause problems. So let's take a look at that. So this is SQL Developer Desktop. And I'm connected to my Oracle database, and this could be an Oracle database anywhere in the world, but the Excel file or the CSV file, it's going to be on my machine or available to me on the network somewhere. If I right click on the tables node, there's an import data item here, and this is going to generate a table on the fly based on the file I send to it. If we expand the tables list and right click on a table and say import data, that's going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to take whichever file we give to it and use it to put the data into the table we've right clicked on. So let's see here, what do I got? This is a fun one. So I don't know how much data you're working with. You could have 100 rows, you could have 1,000,000 rows. I don't really care, especially when it's flat data like this CSV format. One thing you might want to do is make sure you set the encoding properly. If you don't, you can have corruption issues as you go to put it in the database. So I don't know if you guys saw that, but there were some diacritics and characters down here that weren't displaying properly, and that was because I had a UTF-8 file, but the encoding here was set to something other than that. Now that the encoding's set properly, this preview window, this is like basically a browser window of how SQL Developer itself is seeing our CSV file. Now the data looks right to me, so as it's being processed, it should go in the database nice and cleanly. The other things to look at, for our European friends, you'll probably need to change the delimiter to semicolon. If your strings aren't stopped and started with what we call enclosures, you might need to change these. If any of these settings are wrong, this grid down here will be all smudged up and not look right. We've also got this thing, hey, is there a header row? If you don't have this checked, then the column headers turn into a row of data to be inserted. So we need that. If you've got, a bunch of comments up top, you might need to tell us to skip the first 10 rows to get to where the actual data starts. The fun bit where you can get in trouble is right here where it says preview row limit 100. So let's say you've got a 1,000,000 row CSV file and you're going to load it to a new table in the database. This option is in the desktop, the web, and the command line interfaces we have on this feature. So you'll need to take advantage of this in any of those places. This is saying, look at the first 100 rows in this data set and use what you see in that first 100 rows to basically define the table structure. If you don't bump this up high enough, eventually you're going to run into a row that doesn't look like the other rows. Like, for example, it looks like in this first 100 rows, the beer names are like 30 characters or less. I guarantee you on row 101, there's going to be a beer name that's like 35 characters instead. So what we can do here is bump this up. We'll say 1,000. So you'll see we've actually went ahead and read in those 1,000 records. And maybe I still have issues, but if the data is somewhat statistically representative in this preview window, we should have fewer issues. You can always just bump the preview row limit up to the max, but at some point you're going to be spending a lot of time in memory and resources, reading this data into memory so we can just properly size the columns. And so you might want to use a smaller row limit, but then you want to be cognizant. So here we go. Here's our table name. We'll call this right here. We have something available for CSV files in the desktop tool. By default, we're going to do a bunch of JDBC level batch array inserts. So we're not going to do row by row inserts, but it's still not going to be quite as fast as SQL Loader. So if this were a 100 million row CSV file, this insert method will work. You'll just be sitting there for 20, 30 minutes or a few hours as we batch insert those rows across the JDBC driver on the network. If you want to maybe automate this, or you actually just want to see, the inserts we're building, you might want to use this option. So this will just generate a DML or a SQL script with the inserts in it to the table, and also will include the create table command. And then you could take that and fix it up to do whatever you want. The more interesting options here are external table and SQL Loader utility. So, for those really, really large input files, these are much faster. The trick with external table is obviously you need access to a directory on the database server, and you've got to move your CSV file up to the server. So if you don't have access to the server, that's not going to be an option for you. An older take on that, similar technology, is the SQL Loader utility. This actually builds the control file that defines the data that is going to be sent to the SQL Loader program, and will also give you a batch script or a bash script to launch SQL Loader on your machine and run that scenario. The only trick here is SQL Loader is not part of SQL Developer. You need an Oracle client, the same thing you would download to get SQL Plus, for example, to run this. So we do all the work here. We'll shape the data for you, and we'll build the scripts for you. And at the end of the day, you'll take that and run it through SQL Loader. The quick and dirty insert almost always works. And if you set those windows up high enough, when you start to look at this screen, so for example, it's got beer name set to 128. So if I click on this drop down, give me 1 second. I realize I don't have my handy dandy zoom it tool. Where is my zoom? There we go. Yeah. So for this column, there's a drop down control that if I click, this top number is the actual widest column we saw in that preview window of 1,000. The middle number is what we default to. We just take that smallest number and we double it. for giggles. I mean, it's basically just maybe the worst case scenario. You know, you need at least twice as many characters to store the data as we saw in that window, and we default to that. In a proper data modeling scenario, you know exactly how wide you want your columns to be, and you would have created this table already. The 4,000 option, that's the, you know, just brute force, make the column as big as possible so everything always fits. It's up to you which way you want to go. I can't actually, I think, have it. Here we go. Why is it not happy with this? Column name is not valid. It's common. I don't know why I was upset with that. So as I'm basically defining the definitions of each of these columns, we also preview again the data associated with the position in the CSV with what's going to be mapped up into this table. The last thing you want to be aware of when you're importing data, especially in an Oracle database, is dates. So let's see, this created at field is going to be brought in as a date, which is very good. That makes me happy. I always want to store dates as dates. If I'm doing a data model review and I see someone storing anything that looks like a date and anything other than a date, a timestamp, or an interval, I'm going to reject the review and say, hey, you're doing this wrong. So the complication is when you're importing data from these flat files, oftentimes we'll interpret dates as strings. And so you might see it listed up here as a varchar. If it is coming in as a date, you need to tell the tool, hey, how do we get from your string to the actual date? So what would be the equivalent toDate function call to go from this string value to a date in the database? So the nice thing is the tool tries to guess what that format is, and it will pop it in here for you if it can get it right. So if this up here is typed correctly, you'll see the data below without any warning signs, and you know you're good to go. If you need to manually input this, you can put anything in here that you want. So all these warning signs, it's like, hey, this isn't going to match up with what we had there. And we have some common ones up here as well that you can easily click into if you want. For me, this is probably where I spend the most amount of time because I get a lot of weird data from a lot of weird places, and they'll have stray characters or they'll be using local time zones, and I'm not as familiar with the syntax for that. And that's generally when I go to the Google, I look up the temporal docs with all of the masking template types, and I just trial and error until this looks right. So that's probably the two biggest things for doing data imports to a new table. Making sure the column definitions are correct. Keep an eye on keep an eye on the preview row limit. And then also doing imports in general, when you're working with dates, make sure your date formats are properly defined so you don't have any data corruption when they come in. Don't use the chat to ask questions. Use the Q&A. All right. So I already built slides for some of this. Great. A lot of people have kind of given up on SQL Loader, and I'm not sure why. SQL Developer can make using SQL Loader easier. You just actually have to have it installed on your machine. If you got access to the database server, external tables are much more flexible, I think. But if I were to run through that CSV scenario with the SQL Loader option selected, I would see these files created. And if I were on Windows and my path was set up correctly so that SQL Loader could be found, I could simply just double click on this and it would set up, connect, and do the SQL Loader scenario, or the equivalent of this. That's the old stuff. I should say the established, mature stuff. Let's talk about the slightly newer side of the house. So SQL Developer Web. This is available a couple different ways. If you're using autonomous databases in the Oracle Cloud, this is built into the offering. You don't have anything to install, configure. You can just simply click into it. And that looks like this. So look and feel wise, a lot of things in common with the desktop tool. We don't have a tree to navigate the contents of your schema. Instead, we kind of have a drop-down toggle. But here on this tables list, there's a button here I can click, and I can say upload data into new table, or I can right-click on a table and I can say data loading, upload data, or I could also click over here on data loading and drag and drop a file into this space, or click this button and actually just point at the local file on my machine. So what have I got? Downloads. And it's going to do a similar set of steps as we were doing in the desktop. It's not exactly the same, but it's fairly close. So I had to upload that file from my machine up to where Ords is running in Ashburn, Virginia. It's a few hundred miles away, so it wasn't that long. I have some settings here. I want to click this gear. You'll see the encoding was detected. So already the web tool already did a better job of detecting that on the fly. I've got a place here where I can, again, set the enclosures, the delimiter. It detects that, but for some reason, if it got it wrong, you can put in anything you want there. There's also this rows to skip. And here again is that preview. So if I set that to 200, it rescans the file, it re-brings up this preview list. And then it's a pretty similar process to what we had before. I'm going to define a new table based on what I saw in the CSV file. So we had that check-in or created at, and SQL Dev Web is saying, hey, that looks like a timestamp to us. And the reason for that is in the web universe, when we cast things to dates, we always generally attach time zones. So I might actually want to say timestamp with time zone, or even with local time zone. I could change this back to date if I wanted to. And over here again, it has tried to determine or guess what the date format is. And if we get it right, there won't be any indicators of problems here. Now, there's not the SQL Loader option of doing the insert. And it's just going to straight up put the data into my table for me. And if I click finish, we'll see how that goes. There'll probably be some rows fail because I didn't set the window up that high, but we'll find out. As that's working, there's a little running log here. Oh, look, I got 2,100 rows loaded. And everything was successful. So if I come up and say, start from 2021, I can start now doing all that super fancy SQL stuff that we told people, that's the whole reason you want to get it into the database to begin with. So preview windows, date formats. Those are the biggest tricks, or even better, do proper data modeling and create the tables in advance. Oh, something I didn't show. The web interface also allows you to ingest XML files and JSON files, and we try to flatten those to just relational rows and columns, which is kind of nice. So JSON's a pretty popular exchange format now for data. So almost everything's stored as JSON, but when you put it into the database, you might not want to store it as JSON. You might want to just put it in a regular old school relational table. We'll flatten that JSON array of JSON docs into rows. Now, if you have embedded JSON arrays or objects, we'll store that column in the row as a JSON document, but the rest of it will be flat. Same thing with XML. For those keyboard warriors that prefer doing things on the command line, you can do almost all of this and actually a little bit more using SQLcl. So SQLcl has been out since I think 2016. It's got a common code base with SQL Developer and SQL Developer Web. So we're using just a lot of the same logic with different front ends tied to it. So I'm not going to do a full demo of this, but in SQLcl, you need a command to do work, right? So the command that we have in SQLcl is called load. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And if we look at the syntax on this command, I'm saying the lucky thing, this is like the least amount of typing I can do. I can say load into this table the data in this file. Now there are a bunch of parameters that you can set for load scenarios. So I can tell it in advance, hey, you're going to get CSV. Hey, there aren't going to be any column names. Here's the delimiter. So these are all configurable via the set parameter. So I can say set load format delimiter semicolon, and now I've got my European CSV. This was a relatively small data set. So, it inserted the 107 rows in like 300ths or 3,000th of a second. This is a little bit more interesting. Let's say we have a new table, same load command. I'm going to say, create a new table based on the contents of this file and show me the DDL that you're going to use to do the work. So the cool thing here is that same scanning technology we had in the wizards, it's also here in the command line interface. So it's going to detect that there was a date in the CSV, and it's going to say, okay, that needs to come in as a date. And it's going to do the same thing on the column sizing. So you can see it probably found the 64 and it's just doubling it to be safe to 128. It's also got number precision as well. All right. I'm going too slow. Let me speed up a little bit. So SQL Developer Web, the web stuff, that's all powered by ORDs. And the beauty of ORDs is you've got a middleware or mid-tier or web browser sitting somewhere that's like listening for HTTP requests. And you can send work to the database, in this case, via ORDs. So you can speak the language of the web and end up having work done in the database for you. And ORDs makes a lot of this stuff automatic. We understand both sides of the puzzle, and we just let you send up JSON and get JSON back. I'm not going to do a full ORDs demo here, but one of the things you can do with ORDs is you can point at a table or even a view and say, hey, give me an automatic list of REST APIs on this object. And one of the interfaces you get for a table is an endpoint for doing batch loading, which again is going to use the exact same code and paths and logic and tricks that we had built into SQLcl, SQL Developer Desktop, and SQL Developer Web. So when I REST enable a table and I come into the REST workshop screen in SQL Developer Web, Now you can basically right click on a table and we just give you the curl for all of the endpoints. And one of the endpoints here is batch load, which shows us doing a post to the endpoint for the table. And we're just sending a stream of the CSV data in this case. So as an experiment, I don't know when I did that. I did it a few years ago, maybe last year. I took two 5 million row files and I concurrently posted those requests up to ORDS. And I was able to load, I think, those 10 million records in less than 27 or 8 seconds. Again, from my house in North Carolina up to the data center where ORDS was running in Virginia, which is like, I don't know, 300 miles, give or take. So you might be saying, hey, Jeff, what about all those options? Well, the options you append as query string parameters to the URI. So you can add stuff like, hey, I want to insert these rows in batches of 5,000. Since I was doing 5 million rows of inserts, I didn't want to batch them in, groups of 50. And this is also where I could say things like, the delimiter is this. This is all documented in the ORDS docs, but it's very similar syntax to what we had in SQLcl on the help command. All right, finally, data pump. So data pump classically has been used by DBAs because the data pump files have to be in a directory that the database knows about on the database hardware. And DBAs are mean, and oftentimes they don't like giving the cool toys to the developers. So in the recent years, I've seen many developers using data pump. And probably what's happening is, the line between developer and DBA is changing, and we have DevOps and we have people that wear multiple hats, and data pump is so powerful that you're going to want to use it. So there's a data pump command line interface. What is that? It's just, I think that also comes on the Oracle client, same place you get SQL Loader. But there's also a PL/SQL API for data pump, dbmess_data pump. So what we've done in SQLcl is we've built a command called data pump that's shortened to DP. You can type data pump out if you want to, but we like saving you the keystrokes. You can simply right now just say DP export, and we'll build the job for you that will export out your local schema. So if I'm connected to a database as Jeff and I say DB export, it'll export the Jeff schema into the data pump directory on the database server. I have all these options I can set to make changes like, hey, I want the log file to be called this, and I want the dump file to be called that, and I want it to go to a different directory, send it there instead. So you have a lot of control here. And then we just go and do all this work for you. So I type DB export and bam, here's all the work being done. We tell you the job it's starting. We're telling you where we're writing the log to. We're even telling you what the database time zone is, the time zone version, in case there's going to be a mismatch when you go to export it or import it somewhere else. And then we show you everything that's basically been written to the to those data pump support files in your schema, and we're just showing it here in the standard output of the report. As a trick, if you want to be able to run a scenario and then just have it generate the PL/SQL block for you, you can do that. So one of the many flags we have in there is called no exec, or just NE. And so what that says is, hey, let me tell you what to do. So in this case, I'm saying we're going to do an export schema export. Here's the schema list. I want the file name of the dump file to be this. I want the log file to be called this. I want the job name to be called this. And at the end, we have that no exec. And then what pops out is the PL SQL block to go and do that work. And so I could grab that, take it, change it up, and make it be whatever I want. And this is also just a good way to test it to make sure it's doing what you think it's going to do. So you could, run this, and if you're happy with it, hit the up arrow key and to get the SQL history, strike off the any and hit enter, and it'll go and do the work and do the job. Oh, let me, before I toggle off that, as this job is running, if you've got SQL Developer Web on the database where the import or the export's happening, we have built a nice data pump report screen. And so you can see jobs that I've ran previously or that are currently running. So if I wanted to get the log file, we built a log file viewer for that. But since these are exports, I can also get the dump file. I can just click that too. If there's like 5 dump files, it'll grab all 5. We don't have wizards for creating the jobs yet and running them in SQL Dev Web, but that's coming soon. Probably not in the next release, but in a dot release after that or sometime later this summer, we'll have really nice wizards in here to do import and export data pump jobs. One thing I didn't have in this slide that I thought I had, we have the ability to take these data pump export files and immediately stream them down to your local machine. And so you can have your cake and eat it too, basically. So yeah, you need access to the database server, but there's actually a feature in the database B files or binary files. We can stream the B file down locally to the client. Why would we do that? Well, maybe you want that dump file to go up into the Oracle object store. So in the data pump job, you can supply us a credential to your object store, and you can tell SQLcl where you want, which bucket you want to write to. And as the job is finishing, we'll grab the dump file, just like we would here in the download, but on the client, we'll download it, not write it locally, but stream it right back to the object store, in which case you could then do an import on the target database. I'm going to stop. Oh, I have one last slide. Our drivers, product manager, Chris Jones, based in Australia, wanted me to share some love for the developers that actually like writing code. So if you're going to be using our Python driver, we do have some love there for you as well. So using the Python driver, this is how you would load CSV files into a table. I think that's less than 20 lines of code, so not so bad. CSV reader. That's the thing with Oracle. If you don't like interface 1, there's interface 27. There's like a dozen ways to do things. And really at the end of the day, our job is just to give you the things that you're comfortable with and to make this stuff approachable and easy. All right, so I'm going to stop my share. That was 40 minutes of me talking. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us. I'm cool to keep going here and answer questions, but it looks like all of the Q&As were answered.
Jeff, can we briefly discuss, there are a lot of questions on SQL Developer Web and how somebody would get it. Can we just quickly go over all the places you can get SQL Developer Web?
So SQL Developer Web is a web application. So you need a web server somewhere to serve up the web app, right? That would be ORDS, or Oracle REST Data Services. This is a Java application, which means you can basically run it anywhere. You'll download ORDS. Where will you install ORDS? Well, you'll install ORDS generally where you have your other web applications running. If you've got WebLogic or Tomcat, running somewhere, you can easily plug ORDs into that. If you want to simply run this on your laptop and have a private website running on your machine that you're using as a desktop client, you can do that too. I actually do that. So I've got this is actually the new version of words. I can say so this will start up the ORDs process that has the web server built into it. Still learning the syntax. All right, so on my local host, it's listening on port 8080. And so if I go to my browser and do localhost 8080 Word SQL Developer, that's the address to get to SQL Developer Web. Now, let me put this in the chat. I put together a video tutorial that shows how to go from nothing to having SQL Developer Web up and running. Come on, pull up my channel.
You forgot to share your screen.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Oh, good. So you can't see my YouTube stuff. So you missed all the stuff I was doing. That's great. Form of XML. Quit playing video. All right. Share screen. So here I was just showing I can start up ORDs on my laptop if I want, and it starts up a web server for me that I can go log into and do the thing. But let me send you a link. It's not that long. I think it's like 15 or 20 minutes, but I show you how to get ORDs up and going and log into SQL Developer for the first time. That would be this one. And if you go down to the notes, I've even got little jump points where you can skip to just the important stuff and links to the docs. So I'm going to put that in the group chat. I think if I put it in the group chat, everyone can see it. Or if you just Google install SQL Developer Web, you should find it that way too. So that's you doing the work. That's you putting it down. The other option is if you go to cloudoracle.com and you create an autonomous database, either a paid one or a free, always free autonomous database. SQL Developer Web is just there out of the box. I don't know why my web is so slow this morning. I know not everyone's using the Oracle Cloud today. I don't take that personally, but one of the major projects my team is working on this year is bringing SQL Developer Web to any Oracle database in the entirety of the Oracle Cloud, not just the autonomous instances. So I can't tell you when, but maybe fall time period, you'll see in developer tools in Oracle Cloud, just a link there for SQL Developer, and you'll point to the database in OCI, the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and we'll connect to it, and it'll just be like a client tool. But for now, you'll come to autonomous databases. And the nice thing is we have this free tier, always free. You can create 2 of these databases, and I do have 2. And I'll go to my 21C. And here on this page, there's a link here for database actions. Someone at Oracle thought that the word SQL would scare away people, so we called it database actions, but this will launch me into the SQL Developer Web for this database. But if you have ORDs running on your network somewhere and you configure it for the databases you want to use it for, you can have SQL Developer Web for any database running anywhere. If you take a look at it running here and I open up something like DevTools, if I pull up like this log, you can see that we're making requests to ORDs. We have this thing called the database API, and there's an endpoint for getting data pump job log files. So instead of saying select star from, we're saying do a get on this endpoint and print the content here. That was a long-winded answer for how you can get SQL Developer Web, but I hope it helped a little bit. And if not, you know how to find me. I think that Jeff Smith, jeff.d.smith@oracle.com, Google ORDs, Oracle, you're going to find our stuff. If you have questions on any of that, feel free to ask on Reddit, Stack Overflow, the forums, YouTube, Twitter. We'll find you. We'll help you out. And if you want to start to finish webinar for your company, find Brian or I, send us a request. We'll be more than happy to do a sit down with your team, show you the plumbing, how ORDs works, how to install it, what you have to do to get it configured for your developers, for your end users. We're more than happy to do that for people. And we don't even charge for it. Maybe we should charge. We do too much for free. Yeah, so you can't actually get to these links, but we do have links for all of this stuff. Just Google it. Actually, we'll make the slides available, I think today, at which point you will have access to the links.
We had some other questions on blobs, everyone's favorite question.
I love blobs. Well, they want to know how to export blobs.
Yeah, and then this is just the same as anything else. It's just got to be careful of your file size and whatnot. And you're not going to be pretty much doing a blob via a CSV. I mean, you could, but.
Okay, so tools. There's a couple ways to do this. Tools. Actually, let's just do this. Select star from blobs. I've got a couple blobs. Trick, we can show you blobs. It's an animated GIF of SQL Dev, so it looks kind of weird, but that's the actual contents of the blob. If I right click and I say export, choose loader. That's for SQL Loader. And what it does it dumps those blobs out as files. So if we look at our log, it's saying, hey, I did that export you want. You can go find your stuff here. These files right here, those are those blobs. If you know what they are, you can rename them. But this SQL Loader scenario, you could run somewhere else and it'll put those blobs back up. If you want another way of doing this, Google SQLcl blob file JavaScript. And Chris Rice wrote this code for me because you people asked this question a billion times. And this code right here running in SQLcl will go through all of the blobs in your table and write them as local files on your machine. And yes, it can go the other way too. He's got a script that goes through all of the files in a directory and puts them into a table. So yeah, there's ways to do that. How did we keep all these 100 people here the whole time? They generally get annoyed with my voice and run away after a couple minutes. So thanks everyone for hanging out with us. We'll do another one of these probably in 6 weeks, give or take. I don't think we've set the next topic. So if there's something you want to see, send those ideas. Sorry, but I didn't find any optional argument of data pump to export only some tables. And the reason for that is it's not in the V1, but in SQLcl that's going to drop at the end of this month, you'll have that option. So
I mean, you could do it today with regular data pump, just,
yeah,
but
I'm just saying the command in SQLcl doesn't have it yet. So
it'll be with 22.1, right?
you can't take this to the bank because it's not released yet, but I mean, my whole machine is just bogged down. I think I need to reboot. Yeah. Come on. Java. Data pump help. So we've added parameters to allow you to exclude types of objects and specific objects. We've added support for parallelization. So you can say export or import degree 5. So we'll kick off 5 processes and jobs to go through the different files. And then we've also added support for encryption. So you can encrypt to write the dump files, and you can pass the encryption key to read the files. That'll all be available in 22.1 of SQLcl that we hope to put out the end of the quarter, which if you look at your calendar would be in the next week or so. And I show it to you, but my computer's not being nice. So just trust me, it's there. Last chance for questions or saying how awesome you think we are. All right. Thanks, everybody. Look for the recording and the slides, the links for those to be up on the Ask Tom office hours site in the next day or two. And look for the calendar, our next event in the next, I don't know, 4 or 6 weeks or so. Enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time.